I was born without choosing it, Grandma. Those words froze her body. They were not shouted. They were not thrown like a weapon. They were whispered softly, almost casually. But the meaning was unmistakable. It meant, I didn't choose to be born. I didn't choose this life. I didn't choose this family. The grandmother could only blink. She looked at her grandson, Daniel, sitting there as if nothing unusual had happened. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. It felt as if every word in the world had lodged itself in her throat, refusing to move. Daniel's face showed no guilt, no anger, just emptiness. That night she could not sleep. The streetlight outside the window cast a pale glow across the room. The shadow of a tree swayed slowly on the wall, moved by the wind, and memories uninvited began to return. 3 months earlier, 3 years earlier, it had been 3 years since she moved in with her son's family. After her husband passed away, the house was small. 2 bedrooms, 1 living room, 1 bathroom. In winter, cold air slipped through the cracks. In summer, 1 old fan worked endlessly. The refrigerator was almost always the same. Leftover soup, fermented vegetables, a few eggs. When the children first came to live with her, Daniel and his sister Emily had been gentle. They helped with the dishes. They cleaned their room. They smiled often. And she was happy then, truly happy. But poverty has a way of eating away at people slowly, quietly. At school, the children were teased, and every wound they received there came home with them. "Grandma," my friends laughed when they saw our house. "Why is it so small?" They said my clothes look old. Everyone else gets new phones. I'm embarrassed. At first, they spoke carefully. Then the complaints grew sharper, more frequent. She could only say, "Just endure a little longer." But their eyes grew cold, and their hearts drifted away. One day, Daniel suddenly exploded over a school field trip fee. He knew she lived on a fixed pension. Still, he shouted, "If I'm the only one who can't go, everyone will laugh at me. Please." A few days later, it was Emily's birthday. The grandmother prepared what she could: steamed eggs and seaweed soup. There was no cake. Emily went into her room without a word. The grandmother sat alone at the table and swallowed her tears. That night, she heard the children whispering in the living room. "Do you think we're really poor? Yeah, our friends go to academies, get allowance. Why is it so hard for us?" Daniel's voice dropped even lower. "Why did Mom and Dad even have us if it's like this?" Her chest collapsed. In that moment, she realized something unbearable. Her grandchildren resented their lives, even her grandson. That truth kept her awake until morning. A few days later, her son came home with a day's wages and pork. Belly was placed on the table. For a brief moment, smiles appeared. Then Daniel's face darkened again. Another complaint, another crack. And then he leaned in and whispered again, "I was born without choosing it, Grandma." She understood the weight of those words. Why was I born into poverty? Why was I brought into this life? She sat on the bed that night, crying silently. Those words buried themselves deep in her heart. The next morning, she woke as usual and prepared breakfast. The children went to school. Her son and daughter-in-law went to work. Alone, she stared out the window. What should I do? How do I reach their hearts? She realized then, Daniel hid his anger behind longing for love. Emily hid her disappointment behind quiet resentment. And she began to think not about money, but about what she could still give. The grandmother woke up before dawn. Sleep never came that night. The words her grandson had whispered stayed with her, pressing against her chest like a weight she couldn't push away. I was born against my will. She had heard anger before. Complaints, frustration, even shouting. But this was different. This wasn't rage. It was resignation. She sat quietly at the kitchen table, holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. The house was still, too still. For years, she had believed that silence meant peace. Now she knew better. Silence meant things left unsaid for too long. That morning, instead of cooking breakfast, she put on her coat and walked to the small grocery store nearby. She didn't buy food. She bought a cardboard box. When she returned, she pulled an old suitcase from the closet and opened it on the living room floor. Inside were photographs, letters, and a worn notebook. Her life compressed into fragile pieces of paper. She realized then that the children didn't know her story. They only knew the results of it. That evening, when the family gathered for dinner, she didn't sit down right away. "I need you to listen," she said calmly. Her voice wasn't angry. It wasn't weak either. She opened the box and passed around a photograph of herself as a teenager, thin, tired, standing outside a factory. "I worked because I had to," she said, "not because I wanted to." She showed them her journal. "These are the days I was hungry, the days I was afraid." She paused, then looked directly at her grandson. "When you said you were born against your will," she said, "I didn't hear hatred. I heard pain." The room was silent. She slid 2 sheets of paper across the table. "On the first," she said, "write every complaint you've had about this family." Reluctantly, the children wrote, "The house is small. We don't have much. It's embarrassing." Then she handed them the second sheet. "Now write what this family has given you." This time it took longer. Finally, words appeared. "A place to sleep. Someone who waits for us. Someone who never left." She didn't scold them. She didn't lecture. She simply said, "This week we change roles." The next few days were uncomfortable. The grandson washed dishes, his hands stinging from the hot water. The granddaughter cleaned rooms, bending her back the way her grandmother always had. Nothing dramatic happened. No shouting. No punishment. Just repetition. Work. Responsibility. At night, the children started writing again, not complaints, but thoughts. For the first time, gratitude wasn't a word adults used. It was something they felt in their bodies. And slowly, something began to shift. A month passed. Nothing about the house itself had changed. The walls were still thin, the rooms still cramped, the refrigerator still half empty most weeks. But something inside the house felt different. Mornings were quieter, not because people avoided each other, but because no one slammed doors anymore. The children started waking up earlier, not out of obligation, out of habit. They greeted their grandmother first thing, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes shyly, but always on purpose. At the kitchen table, a small notebook appeared. No one announced it. It just stayed there. Each night, someone wrote in it. Not essays, just sentences. "Today I noticed how tired Grandma looked. Today I didn't complain. Today I understood why money feels heavy." The grandmother never corrected their words. She only read them after everyone was asleep. The father, watching all of this quietly, began to change too. He stopped pretending things were fine. He applied for steady work instead of short jobs that ended without warning. The mother picked up extra shifts when she could, not out of guilt, but because she wanted stability more than excuses. Then, one afternoon, the past knocked on the door. A man they hadn't seen in years stood outside. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He simply named a number, an amount that froze the room. The father's hands shook. He looked at his mother instinctively, the way he always had. But this time she didn't speak first. The children did. "I can work after school," the grandson said. "I can tutor," the granddaughter added quietly. No one told them to. No one praised them. They just said it. The next weeks were exhausting. Small jobs, late nights, mistakes, disappointment when plans didn't work. Some days they barely made anything. Other days, strangers surprised them. A neighbor who bought something they didn't need. A customer who paid more than asked. It wasn't luck. It was effort meeting kindness. Slowly, the number got smaller. Not gone, but manageable. When the man returned, he listened. He looked at the family standing together, tired, honest, unpolished, and he softened. Not because they were poor, but because they were present. After he left, no one celebrated. They just sat down, together. Months later, the house still wasn't big, but it felt lived in. The grandson talked about college like it was possible, not guaranteed. The granddaughter found confidence in helping others, not competing with them. One evening, as they shared a simple meal, the grandson looked at his grandmother. "I didn't mean I didn't want to be alive," he said. "I just didn't know why I was—" She didn't answer right away. She didn't need to. He already knew. Outside, the streetlight flickered. Inside, the house held. Not because life was easy, but because no one was carrying it alone anymore.